Great. Well, I want to share. I want to share a message on the subject of friendship, and the reason I want to talk about this is, well, I feel like I'm meant to, but also it has been for me, to my great surprise, probably one of the key lessons I feel like God has taught me in the years that I've known Him, and is still continuing to teach me about. And as I've got to know God better, one of the things that has astounded me about Him is, of course, His power and His might, and the fact that, He holds the whole earth like a poppy seed in the palm of His hands. That is staggering. But I think even more than that, what has just constantly compels me to draw near to Him is His heart. It's not just the strength of His hand, but it's the kindness of His heart towards us, His people. And as I got to know God's heart a little bit more over the years, one of the things that I've noticed seems to grieve Him is poverty. And we were hearing a little bit more about that earlier on this evening, and it's so all the way through Scripture. The Old Testament speaks of idolatry, but before any other sin, and second to that is the plight of the poor, the last, the least, and the lost. But poverty comes in many forms. And Mother Teresa, she's known to have worked with some of the most impoverished people in the world. And yet she's also famous for a quotation that she said, when she said the greatest poverty she ever encountered was the poverty of the Western world, which was a poverty of loneliness. And as I say, we as Jesus' people are to fight poverty in every single form that it takes. This is one of those forms. This is one of many, but it's one of those forms. And one of the things that we'll notice if we read the story of creation is that God is pleased with creation. So He says, oh, this is good. There's all the days where He calls everything into existence and He says that it's good. And then He makes the human race and He says, very good. Wow, this is very good. But then comes the first not good in the whole of the Bible. And it's Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, where God says, it is not good for man to be alone. And what that verse speaks to is more than just Adam needs Eve. What it means is that He's made us and He's designed us in such a way that we would need each other. And this was news to me when I began to discover this, because I had thought, I think probably for a little while after I got to know God, that so long as there was me and God, we were going to be fine. All I need is God, is what I would say. And I was surprised to discover that God didn't agree with me on that statement. He actually thinks that I need other people. He knows that we need one another. And when we talk about loneliness today, we can think of that as simply being by ourselves, but that's not what loneliness is, living a life of a hermit. What loneliness is it's being in a position where we find that nobody really knows me. Nobody really knows me for who I am. I don't feel connected to others. If I wasn't here, they wouldn't notice and they wouldn't miss me. That's the feeling of loneliness. It's that lack of connectedness to other people. And so because of that, what that means is we can find ourselves being lonely in the middle of a crowd. And we can be lonely in a church, in a youth group, in a classroom, in an office, surrounded by people, but with that constant ache of nobody really knows me. And so it may be news to even some of us that actually, if we stop to think about it, we are lonely. And there are things that we've kept hidden, things that we haven't shared. And God's solution to loneliness is relationship. But it's not just any relationship. It's a particular type. So again, when I was kind of like working my way through some of these things, I thought for years the way to be less lonely was to be more popular. If I could get the number of friends up, however you count it, on Instagram or Facebook or just whatever on my contact list, if I could increase the number of friends, then my loneliness level would decrease. And I found that doesn't work at all. God's solution is not just quantity when it comes to relationship. His actual solution is quality of relationship. So his solution for us when it comes to loneliness is not knowing a crowd or being known by a crowd. What it is its closeness with a few. It's intimacy with a few. So don't think number of relationships, think depth of relationship. That's what addresses loneliness. And when I'm talking about friendship tonight, all I can ever really do for in one talk is focus on a particular type of friendship, and that's what I want to talk about, just close friendships tonight and what they're meant to look like. And so when we're thinking this through, have that at the back of your mind, that this is the kind of friendship that we'll probably only ever be able to have with a small handful of people. There are lots of great friendships in the Bible. Lots of people model it to us. Moses and Joshua, David and Jonathan, Paul and Timothy, Jesus and the small group of friends that he had around him as he did life. But I want to look at one particular friendship tonight, and you can find it in the book of Ruth, and it's the friendship of Ruth and Naomi. And if you've never read the book of Ruth, basically, when we open up to it, we are traveling back in time 3,000 years. And if the book was a film, as the kind of like the opening of the film is being played, it would give us a bit of background to the story. And the background is that Ruth's story starts with Naomi. And Naomi lived in Israel. There was a famine in the land of Israel. And so with lots of other people, she and her family decided that they were going to travel somewhere else and try and make a new life for themselves. So they traveled to a land called Moab. Naomi, her husband, and her 2 sons. Then when they're living in Moab, what happens is her 2 sons marry Moabite women. One is called Ruth, and the other is called Orpah. But then tragedy strikes, because Naomi's husband dies. And then sometime later, both of her sons also die. And so after a little while, she decides, I'm going to call it a day. It's not worked out for me in Moab. I'm going to head back to Israel. This is where the film begins. This is where the curtain is pulled back. And there's Ruth, and there's Naomi, and there's Orpah, the 2 daughters-in-law, standing there with Naomi on this dirt track under the Middle Eastern sun. And Naomi begins to make a speech to them that I suspect she's been building up to for quite some time. So I'm going to read you that speech. This is what Naomi says to her daughters-in-law. Ruth chapter 1, starting in verse 8. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. As far as I can tell, that's the only recorded incident in history of anyone clinging to their mother-in-law. It's in the Bible, so it happened. And then Ruth, in response to Naomi's speech, she makes a speech of her own. And Ruth is not someone historians would consider to be significant. She wasn't a ruler of any kind. She wasn't a leader. She wasn't a prophetess. She wasn't even Jewish. And in the Old Testament, that matters. But because of the speech that she makes, here we are 3,000 years later, and she's kind of cheering us on as we seek to follow our God. And this is the speech. So Ruth says, verse 16, "But Ruth replied to her, 'Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me.'" When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. And at this point, I would love to be able to, I really would, launch into a talk about how to find a friend like Ruth, how to get an awesome best mate like Ruth. That's the talk I want to give. And again, over the years, that's the talk I always thought it would be like, because I thought the solution was to loneliness, we've got to make ourselves super attractive in all sorts of ways, whether it's we're good looking or we're rich or we're funny or we're good at sport, but we make ourselves really attractive, and then the friends will come kind of like swarming to us like bees to honey. And yet that doesn't seem to be the way of Jesus. Because what he teaches us again and again and again in every area of life really is that the way to find our lives is to lay it down. Give it up to find it. And so with friendship, I think the real solution to friendship, or the real key to it, is not to try and find a friend like Ruth, but to learn how to be a friend like Ruth. So if there was a title for the talk, it would be Learning to Be a Ruth. And in this little talk, in this little speech that Ruth gives to Naomi, she gives us something of a pattern for what friends are like. She says to Naomi, I will go with you, I will stay with you, and I will die with you. I will go with you. Let's take that one first. At this point, can I just ask, anyone here, if you're currently dating someone else in the room, would you just stand where you are? I'm not going to do much to embarrass you. You just stand. Don't be shy. Everyone who's currently dating someone else in this room, just stand. Great. All right. So the rest of us, first of all, look at all the people who are sitting on the floor. It's quite possible that these people are available to you over the next 2.5 days. Now look at the people who are standing, okay? I'm sure you already know this, but my encouragement would be maybe don't hang out with these people if it's just the two of them and you. And the reason for that, as you probably have already experienced, is that you might find yourself saying, hey, why don't we go to Cafe Uno later and, we can hang out. And so you go there with them to Cafe Uno and you're kind of like sitting around a table. And what will happen is you might glance away at the band for a moment or the people on the dance floor, and then you'll glance back and you'll find the two of them kind of like staring into each other's eyes, feeding each other cheesecake like the Lady and the Tramp film. And you think, okay, this isn't working out, we need to do something else. So you say, why don't we go to the cinema? So you head over to the cinema venue and you're sitting there on the back row of the cinema and you're all watching the film, and you turn to them to say, hey, isn't this film great? Isn't this amazing? And you realize that they are watching the film, but they're watching the film in the reflection in the other person's eyes, and they're just staring at each other like that. And you think, hey, let's go and see, this isn't working out, let's go to the petting place or whatever, the petting zoo. So you go over to there, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? You see where I'm going with this, your minds. And you're there in the petting zoo and you're looking at the animals and you're petting, and you turn around and they're not petting each other. They're just standing 2 meters apart staring at each other, but you think this is disgusting anyway. And that's kind of how it works. Okay, couples, you may sit back down. Thank you. But when it's romantic couples, okay, what we tend to do is we tend to just stare into each other's eyes. Friendship is a little bit different. And of course, the best romantic couples are friends. But friendship is a little bit different, because when it's friendship, what it's about is it's about standing side by side with another person, looking at something in common, standing shoulder to shoulder, but gazing at something in common. And so what that means is that the best friendships tend to be built around common interests. I know that's a really obvious point to make, but it's something that I've been discovering about it. And we probably all know this because we've probably all been in the reverse situation. Have you ever found yourself with somebody with whom you have nothing in common? I remember Mike and I were once traveling across Canada, and we had to drive 6-7 hours a day from one place to the next place. And we were driving with a little team of people, and we found ourselves sitting in this car with a lady who was absolutely lovely, but just did not stop talking. And I at this point, I was 18, and I'm moody now, and you should have seen me when I was 18. And so I'm also a massive introvert, so I really tried for like 2 days to talk to her, but she was driving me up the wall. And so eventually I decided I'm going to have to come up with some kind of plan. This is getting a little bit desperate. My plan was I will put my iPod headphones in, and I will just sit there pretending I'm listening listening to music for 6 hours. And it worked. She ended up talking to Mike. Now, he is an introvert, but he didn't have any headphones with him. So I found a way to avoid it. And if you've ever been, I don't know, on a bus journey or on a train or at a wedding reception, that's my nightmare scenario, where you're sitting with someone and when you have to start a conversation within 2 minutes, it's pretty clear we have got nothing to talk about. This is going to be a long few hours. We know if we can't even hold a conversation with somebody, then we're probably not going to be able to build a friendship with that person. And yet, at the same time, what that means is that when we find someone with whom there is a connection, then there's real potential for friendship to grow. And so I used to think the way that friendship might work is I say, okay, I'm going to be a Ruth to somebody. I'm just going to scroll through my contacts here. I'm going to find a victim. I'm going to be their friend. And actually, great friendships, they tend to be discovered. It's when we find someone and we're like, oh, you too? What, you love that too? So C.S. Lewis, he put it like this. He says, friendship must be about something, even if it were only an enthusiasm for dominoes or white mice. He was living at a time when white mice were very interesting. Those who have nothing can share nothing. Those who are going nowhere can have no fellow travelers. So he's saying friendships are built on something, even if it's just really basic. It's a going somewhere, even if the place we're going is to a shared interest. At its simplest, it's going to a shared interest, but at its deepest, it's having a shared purpose. And so don't be surprised if we find that our closest friendships are often where our natural and our supernatural interests overlap. Have you ever found yourself, again, on a train or on a bus and sitting next to somebody who is a Christian? And you know that because they've blown their cover somehow. You know, they're listening to a Hillsong album or they're reading a Christian book. And you've got that moment of like, how do I tell them? Do I let them know that I'm also a Christian? What do I do? Do I say, that's a good book? Do I go, here I am to worship? Like, how do I? You can see that Beth is the singer in our family. But how do I do it? Like, how do I let them know? And then you do. And then they're like, you're a Christian? You know Jesus too? And straight away, isn't there? There's like that connection. It's like, oh, how did you get to know him? Oh, this is my story. Oh, this is your story. Oh, what are you doing? You know what? And straight away, there's that sense of almost like your family because you are brothers, sisters in him. And my closest friend, despite the fact that he publicly humiliates me every single time I speak, is Mike. And one of the things that oh, shut up. But one of the things that, you know, for us it's that we've got loads of interests in common. We just do. We love doing the same. We love competing with each other. We love reading. We love current affairs. That sort of stuff interests us both. But also we have this shared supernatural interest, which is first of all for him, but also what we want to do with our lives. We want to see Jesus' kingdom come. We want to go all out, and we're a team in that. And the fact that sometimes the vehicle of how that happens will change, but the fact that we're a team isn't going to. And so it's like we're going on an adventure together. And it's such a good question to ask, what am I meant to do with my life? That's a great question to ask. But you know, a really good question to ask as well is, who am I meant to do life with? Who am I meant to do life with? And for some of us, you know, we are called to each other. Ruth and Naomi did not say, hey, let's just sit here by the side of the road being friends. They said, let's go on this adventure together. Friendships like this cannot be forced, but they can be nurtured. I will go with you. I will stay with you, said Ruth. And it's easy to miss what a remarkable statement that was that she made. There are lots of reasons not to stay in that moment. Reason number one, Naomi is telling her to go away. Reason number two, Ruth is a Moabite. So that means when she gets back to Israel, she's going to be a foreigner. She's going to be a second-class citizen. And her chances of finding a husband will be slim to none at a time when being married meant security. Reason number three, why not to stay with Naomi? Naomi is a bitter old woman. I mean, seriously, she gets back to Israel and they say, oh, Naomi, it's so nice to see you. The name Naomi means pleasant. And Naomi says to them, no, don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara, which means bitter. That's my new name. Can you imagine just bumping into an elderly lady on the showground? You say, oh, hello, my name's Alice. And she says, oh, hello, my name is Life Sucks. Are you going to be like, well, we must get together later, Life Sucks? Why would you want to spend time with somebody like that? And yet what Ruth is doing is she's saying, I see all these things about you and I am staying. And what's clear is that Ruth is not sticking around in this moment because there's something in it for her. But what true friends are is they're the people who walk in when everybody else is walking out. And this is why one quality friendship is worth 1,000 skin-deep ones. This scene from Ruth reminds me of a scene that comes in the Lord of the Rings films. And I know they're old now, and not everyone will have seen them. So if you haven't seen them, basically this is what they're about. They're about a little hobbit called Frodo, who has to throw an evil ring in a giant volcano. But it takes him a long time, or 3 films to get there. And there's a lot of danger on the way. And at the start of the journey, he sets out with a group of friends. They're called the Fellowship of the Ring. But somewhere along the line, Frodo realizes that the ring is so evil, it's going to begin to corrupt the fellowship. And so he makes up his own mind, there's no way I can continue to do this with this group. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to sneak away from my group of friends, and I'm going to have to go it alone. And his opportunity comes at this particular moment where there's a battle and a whole load of orcs attack the Fellowship of the Ring. And there's this chaotic kind of scene where there's all this fighting going on. And at this moment in the film, Frodo sneaks away in the chaos, slips down to a riverbank where they've got their canoe, gets in the canoe by himself and begins to row away. And no one realizes what has happened apart from his steadfast, faithful friend, Samwise Gamgee. Sam realizes, oh my word. Yes, come on, Sam. Sam realizes what is going on. So Sam runs down to the river and he bursts through the trees. And for those of you who have not seen Lord of the Rings, allow me to act this for you now. Okay, so he bursts through the trees and he sees Frodo, who at this point is in the canoe and already some distance from the shore. And so he shouts at him, Mr. Frodo, Mr. Frodo, not alone, Mr. Frodo. And then the camera switches and it's Frodo's face and he's just like crying and he just goes, no, Sam, no. And then Sam looks at the boat and he looks at the water and you can see him get his courage up and he just throws himself into the water and starts to splash through. And then Frodo goes, no, Sam, no. And Sam just keeps going. He just keeps going. And then Frodo goes, Sam, I'm going to Mordor alone. And Sam says, of course you are, Mr. Frodo, and I'm coming with you. And he carries on. And then Frodo starts panicking and he says, you can't swim, Sam. You can't swim. And Sam goes, because he can't swim. And he's underneath the water and it cuts to underneath the water and it goes into slow motion. And you see Sam's hand kind of reaching up towards the surface of the water, but sinking and sinking while these shafts of sunlight kind of like go through it. And it goes on for ages and you think, oh my word, he is actually going to drown. And then at the last possible moment, Frodo's hand plunges in and he grabs Sam and he pulls him up into the boat. And these 2 hobbits sit there, bedraggled, wet, tears and water streaming down their faces. And then Sam, when he's recovered a little, he looks at Frodo fiercely and he says, I made a promise, Mr. Frodo. I made a promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee, and I don't mean to. I don't mean to. And here's the thing. For us, we are called, if we want to be this kind of friend, we are called to be a Sam. We're called to be a Ruth. And it's not easy. Because what happens for so many of us, isn't this the case for you? When we go through things that are painful and things that cause us shame, so often what we do is we isolate ourselves. Like Naomi was doing, no, you stay here. No, you stay here. Like Frodo was running away, not just from the orcs, but from his own friends. We isolate ourselves. And our job is that when we see a friend who is going through depression or anxiety or an eating disorder or bereavement or divorce, we see a friend going through something tragic, our job is to stay. Hear what our job is not. Our job is not to fix. There are some things that for the best of intentions we want to take on and we want to sort out, but some things only Jesus has the power to heal. Sam cannot take the ring from Frodo. Ruth does not to say to Naomi, hey Naomi, I'll come with you and I'll sort your life out. She doesn't say that. She says something simpler but incredibly profound. She says to her, in the midst of all of your problems, I will stay with you. And what friendships are always meant to have is commitment. The biblical word for it is covenant. It's a much stronger word than our word commitment. It's binding agreement. And what covenant does, what commitment does, is it sounds like it might be a thing that traps us, but it's a thing that frees us. Because in the context of committed relationship, we, for the first time, some of us are able to take our masks off, take off the filter that we put not just on our social media, but on the way that we talk to one another, and be real. How many of us last night or the night before came forward for stuff that we were so ashamed of, but we hadn't ever said to somebody? What covenant does is it creates a context where it's okay to admit that you're not okay. I had a friend when I was at university who got dumped by his girlfriend. And I remember, even though it was years ago, sitting in the bar at our college, chatting to him and trying to sort of like comfort him a little bit. And he'd had a few to drink, which is probably why he said to me what he said. But he basically said, don't worry about me, Andy. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. And then he said, and the reason I'll be fine is because I'm like a castle. And I've got an outer wall, and I've got an inner wall, and then I've got the keep right in the middle. And he said, sometimes what I do is I let people behind the outer wall, and sometimes I'll let people behind the inner wall, but nobody ever gets into the keep. And I knew exactly what he meant, because that's how I'd lived so much of my life. He meant, I've got my armor on, I've got my guard up, and you might get to know some of me, but there'll be bits of me that no one will ever see. And the attractive thing about that is it's safe. Because although you can be hurt, maybe you can never be totally devastated. The unattractive thing about that is it will always be lonely. It's a fast track to loneliness, because no one can ever love you if they don't see you. And until you give somebody else the keys to the keep, where you say, this is me and all the stuff that I struggle with, this is who I am, unless you give that to somebody else, they can't see you, and therefore they can't know you, and therefore they can't love you as you are. And I've had to wrestle with this one in my own life, because I shut myself down pretty hard emotionally when I got hurt back in the day. And I know for some of us here, you've been in a place where maybe you have given away the keys of the keep to somebody else, and they have devastated you. And the temptation when that happens, and I know it because I've experienced it, is to say, no one's ever going to do that to me again. And if we take that option, then what we do is we minimize the risk of being hurt, but we maximize the risk, and it's not just a risk, it's a certainty of loneliness. And so my encouragement would be to follow the example of someone like Ruth, but also Jesus, who himself was betrayed with a kiss. And yet rather than responding by suddenly putting his guard up, he allowed himself to be led to the cross, the most vulnerable point of his entire life. He continued to choose vulnerability, that we might in wisdom, and maybe slowly to begin with, find people to whom we can give the keys to the keep. And our role as we seek to be a Ruth is to be trustworthy keepers of those keys for other people. People who say, look, I see your addiction to pornography. I see that. I see what you're like with your mood swings. I see your flashes of anger that you regret afterwards, but you just can't seem to control. I see those things. I see you at your worst, and I need you to know I love you, I'm committed to you, and I'm not going anywhere. Now, I'll go with you. I'll stay with you. I cannot prove this from the text, but I strongly suspect that Ruth attended drama school in Moab because she knows how to build a speech to a crescendo. She really does. So she goes, I will go with you. I will stay with you. I will die with you. And then she starts going on about, and then my corpse and your corpse are going to be buried together, and we're going to be friends in the grave. And at that point, Naomi's like, okay, I get it. You're coming with me. All right, let's just get going. And it sounds like she's being dramatic, but actually she was declaring a truth. Because to go with Naomi was a dying to self. And I used to think that friendship really should be free. You know, that it shouldn't cost me very much. I've learned that actually your few great friendships will cost you greatly. And they'll cost us in our money, they'll cost us in our time, they'll cost us in our patience, they'll cost us in our emotional energy. Friendship is an exercise in dying to self. And Jesus put it like this. He says this, John 15, verse 12. My command is this, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And that sounds grandiose, this big picture of laying down our lives for another. But actually, the way it works out is in 100 small, everyday ways. Ways that we lay down our lives for others. One is to prefer them and to champion them instead of ourselves. Paul, in the Message translation of Romans chapter 12, verse 10, he says this, be good friends who love deeply. Practice playing second fiddle. Now, I don't know much about orchestras, but I have heard that playing second fiddle is one of the hardest roles you can play, second violin, because the whole point of second fiddle is that first fiddle's out there going crazy in the limelight, and everyone's like, oh my word, you're amazing. And second fiddle is back in the shadows, just playing away, adding texture, and making first fiddle look phenomenal. And what friends we're called to do is to champion the other, is to rejoice in their successes, is to weep in their failures. And I think I've been on the receiving end of this. Mike and I, we lead a lot of ministry together in all sorts of different contexts. And I'll tell you the truth, for all that he takes the mick out of me, this is how it works really. All right? What happens is, if something goes well, honestly, he finds a way to give me the credit. And if something goes badly, he always finds a way to take the blame. And there's that thing of rejoicing in the other and championing the other, being strong enough to play second to somebody else. Second way that friendships involve a dying to self, forgiveness. Forgiveness. Any authentic, real relationship that's gone on for more than a couple of weeks will have moments where there's a need to forgive. It just will, because we're all broken and we'll break each other. And forgiveness is an exercise, again, in dying to self. If you think forgiveness is easy, it's probably because you haven't got anything to forgive. It becomes incredibly hard when someone has actually done something to hurt you. But what can happen is if we learn to forgive quickly, then those friendships which seem to be weakened by the hurt actually become strengthened as we recognize that we're both damaged and we can still love each other and let it go. Third way that friends sometimes have to die to themselves, learning to speak the truth when it would be easier to keep your mouth shut. And we're told elsewhere in the scripture that we're to speak the truth in love. Proverbs chapter 27 verse 6 says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. And what this means is not that we can kind of like get our phones out right now and send some truth bombs to a few people that we've been wanting to let know about a few things. No, the sign that we're on the right track with this is when we really don't want to say something to a person. We'd really rather keep our mouths shut because it would be safer and easier, but we love them too much not to say. And so we're going to say. If you have a friend who tells you, yes, actually, your bum does look a bit big in those jeans, then you need to kiss them and never let them go, because they're a friend who tells you what the truth is. And again, it's like this is worth our weight in gold. They're worth their weight in gold because so often we don't see our own blind spots. Again, I remember there was a time Mike and I were driving somewhere, and I said something. I can't for the life of me remember what it was now, but I remember saying it and thinking, that was an incredibly arrogant thing to say. And actually, that's quite in tune with a few things I've been saying recently. And so I just turned to Mike as we were driving, and I just said to him, hey mate, I think I've become quite proud. Do you know what he said? And he said it so kindly. He just looked at me and he said, yes, Andy, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. The git. But he said it. He told me the truth. And I was so grateful to him for it. Now what this is it's mutual. So Ruth does these things for Naomi, but Naomi spends the rest of the book of Ruth, if you read it, doing these things for Ruth too. And I hear this stuff and I think, oh my word, I will go with you, I will stay with you, I will die with you. That's a pretty long list of things. How am I ever going to be a friend like that to another person? That's too big for me. And the real secret to this is to hear what Jesus says in John chapter 13, verse 34, where he says this, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And in that verse is the secret to being a Ruth to another person. Jesus tells us to love each other, but then he goes a step further and he defines love for us as I have loved you. And you see, the way that I've done relationships for so many years, on a good day, this is how I've done it, is I will love you how you love me. So if you say something nice to me, I will say something nice back. If you do the washing up at the campsite one day, I will do the washing up at the campsite the next day. If you buy me a birthday present, I will buy you a birthday present of a similar monetary value. Because I love you how you love me. But that's not what he says. He doesn't say that I'm to love you how you love me. What he says is, I'm to love you how he loves me. So whether you're having a good week or a bad week, I'm to love you how he loves me. How's he loved me? He's called me on the greatest adventure ever. He said, Andy, let's go together to build the kingdom of the Father. Let's do it together. He said, Andy, I see you on your worst day, of your worst week, of your worst year, of your entire life. I see you in your shame and your guilt, and I am sticking with you. And I'm actually going to make a covenant with you, and I'm going to seal that with my blood. I'm staying with you. And he's laid down his life for me. And so I'm called to do that for others. And so are you. And, we're told by Jesus to love our enemies. How are we ever going to love our enemies if we can't love our friends? This is where it starts. And we can think that this is an insular thing, but it's really not. Because what Jesus says is, and we just read it a moment ago, by this shall everyone know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. It's the great test he gives the world. The quality of our love for each other shows that we belong to him. And of course it would. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've thought, of course, it's an absolute genius master plan. It would be. It's Jesus. He's come up with a plan for how to heal a broken, lonely world. Do you know what his plan is? It's a church that loves one another and invites the world to come and be part of that love. And what happens is, as we develop friendships like these, they become like stones thrown into lakes, and they fall into the middle of this lake, and it ripples out, and people hear the gospel. They hear the way that God loves us in our weakness and is committed to us anyway. And they think, gosh, that reminds me of the love that I saw between those two people. They see the love between two people and they think, gosh, that reminds me a lot of the love that I've heard that God has for me. That reminds me a lot of the gospel that I've heard. And people begin to wake up and pay attention, because the world is dying in loneliness. And what it needs to discover is friendship like this. It begins with us, and it begins in the church. Amen? Amen. All right.